John Bowens, step away from the vehicle.
What's going on?
This is John Bowens. He's worked with the Seattle Animal Shelter for years. In about 30 seconds, that career and his freedom will be gone.
John, about the dogs in Block C. We found 12 of them severely underfed. Some
Not my fault. Nobody wants to adopt them. They're a waste of money.
Sir, face the vehicle now.
You can't do this. I'm telling you, you can't.
His name was Bruno, 4 years old. Brindle coat, wide brown eyes that shelter staff described the same way every time. Calm. He arrived at Cascade Paws Animal Shelter on February 3rd, 2025, surrendered by a Tacoma family relocating out of state. His intake form had 3 fields under behavioral notes: gentle, house-trained, food-motivated. By the morning of February 9th, he was dead. 2 camera angles, 38 seconds of footage, a King County forensic video analyst, a first-degree animal cruelty charge, a 12-year state prison sentence, and a lifetime ban from ever owning or working with an animal again. The man on that footage had worked at Cascade Paws for 3 years. He had a dog growing up. It was the reason he said he wanted the job. His name was John Darius Bowens. And the investigation started with one supervisor who looked at a nightly log entry and knew something was wrong. Before we go any further, have you ever adopted or surrendered an animal to a shelter? Tell me in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe now. We cover cases that deserve more attention than they get. John Darius Bowens was born in 1995 in Rainier Beach, one of the southernmost neighborhoods in Seattle, pressed up against the eastern shore of Lake Washington. It is a neighborhood that has historically absorbed more than its share of everything a city tries to move away from: low-income housing, underinvested schools, the trailing edge of every economic downturn. It is also, to the people who grew up there, simply home. Block parties on August evenings. Kids on bikes until the streetlights came on. The smell of someone grilling 2 houses down on every weekend from May through September. Bowens grew up in a 1-story rental on a block just off Rainier Avenue South. His mother, Diane Bowens, worked as a home health aide, an occupation that required her to be in other people's homes when they could not care for themselves, quiet and capable and trusted completely. His father left when John was 7. He is not mentioned in any subsequent public record. Diane raised him alone. She was, by all accounts, a steady presence. She worked early shifts. She kept the house clean. She made sure her son went to school. She was not the kind of parent whose name appeared in newspaper profiles. She was the kind of parent who made sure the electricity stayed on. When John was 11, a dog appeared in the neighborhood. No collar. No one claimed it. The neighbors called it a nuisance. Diane Bowens called a vet. The dog was not sick, just hungry and lost. She brought it inside. John named it Biscuit. He fed Biscuit before he fed himself for the next 6 years, until Biscuit died of old age when John was 17. He cried for 2 days and told no one outside the house. He attended Rainier Beach High School on South Henderson Street and graduated in 2013. He was not a standout student. He was not a problem student. He was the kind of student who sat in the middle of the room and waited for school to be finished so he could do something else. That something else looked like a career. After graduation, he enrolled in the veterinary technician program at South Seattle College, a 2-year track for credentialed veterinary support staff. He was interested. He was doing well. Then Diane's employer cut her weekly hours, and 2 months of missed rent put them 60 days behind. John Bowens left the program after 11 weeks, 4 weeks from completing his first year. He never re-enrolled. He picked up Petco stock shifts, dog walking gig work through Rover.com, and eventually part-time kennel work in Burien, $14.25 an hour, feeding and exercising dogs that belonged to people who could afford to go somewhere for a week. He applied to Cascade Paws Animal Shelter in January of 2022. The shelter operated a 120-kennel facility on Beacon Avenue South, affiliated with Seattle Animal Shelter's municipal network, privately managed but publicly contracted. His application listed his Burien kennel experience, his Rover history, and, under the section asking why he wanted to work with animals, a single paragraph that ended with a mention of a dog named Biscuit. He was hired at $19.40 an hour. His first evaluation, written 6 months in by shelter supervisor Renata Sousa, described him as reliable during high-volume intake days and noted that he demonstrated patience with fearful animals, dogs that came in injured or that had been poorly socialized, the ones that backed into the corner and showed their teeth. Bowens was good with those dogs. He didn't rush them. His 2023 evaluation, written by Sousa again, noted a decline in documentation. He was completing tasks but not logging them correctly, cleaning rounds that were finished but not time-stamped, work orders that were closed before they were formally opened. She wrote that he occasionally needed redirection from senior staff on following the paper trail. The note was filed. No disciplinary action was taken. In early 2024, Bowens' shift schedule changed. He moved to overnight and weekend rotations, Friday through Monday, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The overnight shift at Cascade Paws ran with 1 to 2 staff members covering 80-plus animals across 4 kennel blocks and the intake ward. There were no managers on site between midnight and 5 a.m. The cameras covered the lobby, the intake room, and the outdoor runs. The kennel corridor cameras, installed 14 months earlier following a separate internal incident, had one known limitation: a partial blind spot near the far row of Kennel Block C. John Bowens knew the camera positions. He had been the one to show the new intake volunteer where they were, back in the spring. To understand what happened inside Cascade Paws, you need to understand what a licensed animal shelter actually is, not the version of it that exists in donation campaigns and adoption day photographs, but the operational reality of a facility processing hundreds of animals per month on a budget that is perpetually insufficient. Cascade Paws was a mid-sized contracted municipal facility. On any given day in early 2025, it held between 90 and 130 animals: dogs, cats, the occasional surrendered rabbit or bird. The dog population was divided into 4 kennel blocks, organized by behavioral assessment. Green tag for animals cleared for general adoption viewing. Yellow tag for those still in evaluation. Red tag for animals requiring behavioral intervention or medical monitoring, and the intake and isolation ward, Kennel Block C, for newly arrived animals completing their mandatory 72-hour hold. The shelter ran 2 full-shift rotations: day shift, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., with 3 to 4 staff on the floor; swing shift, 3 p.m. to 10 p.m., with 2 to 3, and overnight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., with a mandated minimum of 1 certified staff member. In practice, overnight was frequently covered by a single kennel technician. The on-call supervisor could be reached by phone. They were not required to be present. Kennel Block C, the intake and isolation ward, operated under its own protocol. Animals in Block C were not yet cleared for public viewing. They were assessed individually, recorded individually, and accessed individually by staff. A kennel technician entering Block C during the overnight hours was, by design, alone with the animals. The protocol existed for the animals' welfare. New intakes were stressed, and exposure to other animals or excess foot traffic could compromise behavioral assessments. The unintended consequence of that protocol was that no one else was ever in Block C when a staff member was working the overnight shift alone. The corridor camera serving Block C had been installed in November of 2023. Prior to that installation, the corridor had no camera coverage at all, a gap identified after a volunteer reported an unexplained injury to a kennel dog. The camera covered approximately 70% of the corridor's length from a fixed angle mounted near the entry door. The far 3 kennels in the row, including the unit designated KC07, fell into the partial blind spot. Animals in KC07 were not fully visible on camera. Their kennel door was. No one on staff had flagged this as a problem. It was a known limitation of the camera's fixed mount, logged in the facility's infrastructure notes, and not yet addressed in the budget cycle. Bruno arrived on February 3rd and was assigned KC-07. Bruno had been at the shelter for 5 days when John Bowens worked his overnight shift on February 8th. His shift began at 10 p.m. Staff member Devante Nkosi, on swing rotation, would later tell investigators that Bruno had barked at Bowens specifically during shift change, sharp and directed, not the anxious vocalization of a stressed intake dog. Nkosi noted it and said nothing. Bruno barked at some people. At 11:47 p.m., the corridor camera recorded John Bowens entering Kennel Block C. He carried no food bowls. He was not scheduled for a feeding round. He walked to KC-07. He looked back toward the entry door once. He pulled the kennel open. The next 38 seconds are the evidentiary foundation of this case. The corridor camera captured Bowens' body position shifting, twice, in a manner a forensic video analyst would later describe as consistent with a forward kicking motion, directed downward at knee height. Bruno's kennel registering impact twice. Movement inside the kennel consistent with an animal striking the wall. Bowens exiting, pulling the door closed, adjusting his shirt, walking back toward the entry door without pausing. A second camera, at the rear of the outdoor run corridor, caught 9 seconds of footage as Bowens left the block. His breathing, captured on the camera's integrated audio, was elevated. At 12:14 a.m., he logged Bruno, KC-07, showing signs of GI distress, possible upset stomach, reduced movement, flagged for morning vet check. He did not call the on-call veterinarian. He completed his shift, clocked out at 6:02 a.m., and drove home. Renata Sosa arrived at 7:03 a.m. and began her morning rounds at 7:18. She found Bruno at 7:31, collapsed on his side inside KC-07, breathing in rapid shallow pulls, unable to stand. She called the on-call emergency vet line immediately and was told to transport. Bruno was loaded into the shelter's transport carrier at 7:44 and delivered to Blue Ridge Veterinary Emergency in the Eastlake neighborhood of Seattle at 8:09 a.m. He was in surgery by 8:35. He died on the operating table at 9:31 a.m. on February 9th, 2025. The attending veterinarian documented the cause of death as hypovolemic shock secondary to internal hemorrhage. The necropsy, completed 2 days later, identified 3 fractured ribs on the left side, a ruptured spleen, and bruising consistent with blunt force trauma to the left lateral trunk. The veterinary forensic specialist's written conclusion read, injury pattern inconsistent with self-trauma or accidental fall, consistent with repeated forceful impact delivered externally to the animal's left side. Bruno had weighed 61 pounds. The force required to fracture 3 ribs and rupture a spleen in a 61-pound dog is not incidental. It is not a stumble or a misstep. It is deliberate. Renata Sousa read the overnight log at 9:47 a.m. She had already received the call from Blue Ridge telling her Bruno was gone. She sat at her desk with the log open and read John Bowens' entry 3 times. GI distress. Possible upset stomach, reduced movement. A dog with 3 broken ribs and a ruptured spleen does not present as a possible upset stomach. GI distress does not explain the injury pattern documented in Bruno's necropsy. Sousa was not a veterinarian, but she had worked in animal shelters for 11 years. She knew what a dog in acute internal distress looked like. She knew what the log entry should have said if that dog had been seen by a competent observer at 11:47 p.m. She called shelter director Felice Oduya at 10:02 a.m. Oduya arrived at the shelter at 10:41 and pulled the Block C corridor footage herself on the facility's DVR system. She watched it once. She called Seattle Animal Control at 10:58 a.m. and the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office at 11:14 a.m. The same afternoon, separately and without contact with Sousa or Oduya, co-worker Devante Nkosi walked into the Seattle Animal Control Field Office on Airport Way South and asked to speak with an investigator. He had seen the shelter vehicle leave that morning with Bruno in the carrier. He had heard from another staff member that Bruno did not survive. He told the investigator what he had seen approximately 2 months earlier. John Bowens, during a supply corridor moment that Nkosi had briefly witnessed, handling a dog in a manner he described as rough. A hard shove, a grip behind the neck that lasted longer than it needed to. He had not reported it at the time because he could not be certain of what he had seen. He was certain now that he should have been. Animal control investigator Dana Strand opened a formal case file at 3:44 p.m. on February 9th, 2025. She cross-referenced Bowens' overnight shift log history with the facility's animal health incident reports going back 8 months. What she found would take the next 11 days to document fully, but the outline was visible within the first 48 hours. The physical evidence was the foundation. The necropsy report established cause of death and injury mechanism. The King County Medical Examiner's forensic veterinary specialist, Dr. Carolyn Ibarra, provided a written opinion that the injury pattern was consistent with repeated blunt force applied with significant energy to a restrained or cornered animal, and inconsistent with any form of accidental trauma. The opinion was submitted to the prosecuting attorney's office on February 14th. The digital evidence became the case. King County's Digital Crimes Unit assigned forensic video analyst Terrence Webb to the Cascade Paws footage on February 11th. Webb worked with both camera angles, the 38-second Block C corridor recording and the 9-second outdoor run audio capture, over 3 days of enhancement and frame-by-frame analysis. His 31-page report identified the following in the enhanced corridor footage. Bowens' right leg executing 2 distinct forward motion sequences, consistent with a kicking motion directed at a low target. Bruno's kennel registering impact twice in synchrony with those sequences, and the audio channel of the outdoor run camera capturing 2 separate impact sounds during the window. Bowens was inside the kennel, sounds Webb categorized as consistent with a boot striking a hard surface at force. Webb noted one qualification. The camera angle placed Bowens partially outside the frame at the moment of the first sequence. The second sequence was fully visible. His conclusion, the footage, in combination with the necropsy findings and the veterinary forensic opinion, established a strong evidentiary basis that the fatal injuries to Bruno were inflicted intentionally during the 11:47 p.m. window. The witness testimony added dimension. Devante Nkosi's formal statement described the supply corridor incident from approximately 2 months prior in precise and consistent detail across 2 separate interviews. Renata Sousa's statement documented the discrepancy between the overnight log entry and Bruno's actual condition on discovery. The attending emergency vet at Blue Ridge provided a timeline of Bruno's presentation on arrival, injuries she described as not survivable without immediate surgical intervention that had not been available during the hours Bruno had been left untreated. The pattern evidence was the part that would make jurors go quiet in the courtroom. Investigator Strand's review of 8 months of Kennel Block C incident logs found 3 prior animals assigned during Bowens' overnight rotations who had presented with unexplained injuries. A 3-year-old mixed breed, intake date July 2024, was euthanized 9 days after arrival for what the shelter's veterinary contractor characterized as trauma of unknown origin. Unexplained bruising along the left torso, behavioral shutdown consistent with acute pain. A 5-year-old female shepherd mix, intake date September 2024, presented with a fractured dew claw and bruising on the right shoulder 3 days into her stay. The incident was logged as a possible kennel impact, and she was adopted before any follow-up investigation was initiated. A 2-year-old male terrier, intake date November 2024, was found by the morning shift with a dislocated jaw, logged as possible self-trauma against kennel bars, and was euthanized for quality-of-life reasons 4 days later. All 3 animals had been assigned KC-07, or the adjacent unit, KC-06, during the relevant period. All 3 injuries occurred during a window that included one of Bowens' overnight shifts in the preceding 12 hours. None of the 3 incidents had been connected to Bowens prior to the Bruno investigation. None had triggered a review of staff access logs. Each had been resolved individually and filed as an unexplained kennel incident. The smoking gun was 38 seconds of video and a log entry that said upset stomach. John Bowens was arrested on February 20th, 2025, in the rear service lot of Cascade Paws Animal Shelter at 2:17 p.m., while loading supply bags into the shelter's white van. He had shown up for his shift. Officer Thibault approached from the lot entrance with a second officer flanking right. Animal Control Investigator Dana Strand came in from the service door side. Bowens was mid-task, one supply bag half-loaded, earbuds in. He pulled an earbud out as Thibault closed the distance. Officer Thibault, OS, measured. John Bowens, Seattle, PD, step away from the vehicle. Bowens, confused, pulling earbud out. What's going on? What is this about? Officer Thibault, OS, stepping closer. Hands where I can see them, sir. Step back from the van. Bowens, voice rising, gloves coming off. I work here, man. I work right here. Somebody needs to tell me what this is about. Investigator Strand, stepping into frame, flat. John, this is about Bruno, the dog in Block C. A pause. 1 full second, maybe 2. Bowens' hands stilled. Bowens, shifting register, voice recalibrating. Bruno got sick. I logged it. I followed protocol exactly the way I'm supposed to. Investigator Strand. We've reviewed the corridor footage. Bowens, gesturing, voice tightening. Then you saw me check on him. I checked on him all night. Animals get sick in the overnight. That's part of the job. I flagged it for the morning vet, just like I'm trained to. Officer Thibault, OS, firm. John Bowens, you are under arrest for first-degree animal cruelty. Turn around. Bowens, stepping back, voice going up. For what? I have been here 3 years. 3 years. I care about every single one of these animals. You have the wrong person. This is completely wrong. He was handcuffed in the rear service lot at 2:19 p.m. He asked for an attorney before the second officer had finished securing the cuffs. He did not speak again during transport. The shelter's staff watched from the rear exit door as he was walked to the patrol vehicle. Renata Sousa was not among them. She had gone home after her morning shift and did not return that day. Cases like Bruno's rarely make national headlines. If you think they should, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We cover cases that get buried. On March 11th, 2025, a King County grand jury returned a 2-count indictment against John Darius Bowens. Count 1, first-degree animal cruelty under RCW 16.5 2.205, relating to Bruno. Count 2, first-degree animal cruelty under the same statute, relating to the pattern of unexplained injuries in Kennel Block C across the 8-month period, documented in Investigator Strand's review. Washington State's first-degree animal cruelty statute is a Class C felony, maximum 60 months per count. The prosecution filed for consecutive sentencing. Bowens' public defender, Garrett Ulrich, entered a not guilty plea. Pre-trial motions challenged the admissibility of the pattern evidence and the reliability of the forensic video analysis. Judge Vera Kimathi denied both in June, ruling the pattern evidence admissible under Washington's res geste doctrine and leaving the video analysis for the jury to weigh. The necropsy, the veterinary forensic opinion, and both camera recordings were admitted in full. Trial began August 4th, 2025, in King County Superior Court. 6 days, 11 witnesses, Souza and Kosi, shelter director Felice Oduya, the attending veterinarian from Blue Ridge, forensic specialist Dr. Carolyn Ibarra, video analyst Terrence Webb, investigator Strand, 3 former staff members on the prior incidents, and a King County animal control officer who testified to the statistical improbability of 4 unexplained injuries in the same kennel block across overlapping overnight shifts. The jury deliberated 4 hours and 11 minutes. Guilty on both counts. The victim impact statement was submitted by the Macedo family of Tacoma and read aloud in open court by shelter director Felice Oduya. It described Bruno as the family's dog for 4 years, rescued as a puppy, house-trained by their daughter Ava over the summer when she was 5, walked every morning and evening on a neighborhood route. It described the decision to surrender him as one of the hardest the family had made during an already difficult relocation, and the conversations with Ava about where Bruno would go, and the assurances that the shelter would be safe. It ended with one sentence. Our daughter was told he got sick. She is 9 years old. She still asks about him. Judge Vera Kimathi sentenced John Darius Bowens on September 3, 2025. Her remarks ran 12 minutes. Mr. Bowens, you applied for this position. You sought it out. You presented your history with animals as evidence of your suitability to care for them. The court has spent considerable time with that history. What I can tell you is that the court is not required to reconcile it. It is required to sentence you for what you did. The animals in Kennel Block C could not leave. They could not report. They were placed in your care by a system that depends entirely on the integrity of the people operating within it. You understood that dependency, and you exploited it, not once, but across 8 months, in a facility where the staff who trusted you believed you were one of the most patient people they had ever seen with a frightened animal. The footage is not the only evidence. The necropsy is not ambiguous. The veterinary forensic opinion is not ambiguous. The pattern of injuries across your shifts is not ambiguous. What is ambiguous is how anyone who grew up with a dog, who named that dog, who writes about that dog in a job application, ends up here. 72 months on count 1, 72 months on count 2, consecutive, 144 months total, 12 years, Washington State, restitution of $74,300 to Cascade Paws Animal Shelter. A lifetime prohibition on owning, residing with, or working with animals in any capacity as a condition of any future supervised release. John Darius Bowens was transferred to Washington Correction Center in Shelton, Washington. Projected release, March 2033. Following Bowens' conviction, Cascade Paws Animal Shelter announced infrastructure changes effective before the end of 2025. Full coverage camera installation across all 4 kennel blocks, eliminating every remaining blind spot. A mandatory 2-person overnight shift policy. Automated incident flag protocols triggered by any animal health deviation logged during overnight hours, requiring supervisor sign-off before morning shift. Washington State Representative Nadia Forsyth introduced legislation in January 2026, requiring all licensed shelters statewide to maintain minimum overnight staffing levels and mandating incident-triggered video review for any unexplained animal injury. The bill, informally called Bruno's Law in committee discussion, was pending as of the date of this publication. In February 2026, on the 1-year anniversary of Bruno's death, the Macedo family's daughter Ava planted a rosebush outside Rainier Beach Community Center on South Henderson Street. The shelter placed Bruno's intake card in a frame mounted near the front lobby door at Ava's request. The card reads, in the standard printed fields of a shelter intake form, 3 lines under behavioral notes: gentle, house-trained, food-motivated. Bruno didn't have a voice. But the case right here on your screen, the person in it had every advantage and threw it all away. Click it.